The world will try to hypnotize you into accepting appearances as final. It will demand that you bow before visible facts, temporary conditions, and the evidence of your senses. It will whisper constantly, "Look around you. This is your reality. This is who you are. This is what is possible for you." But I tell you tonight, appearances are not reality. Circumstances are not truth. The outer world is only the delayed shadow of your inner assumptions. If you wish to transform your life, you must stop worshipping what your eyes can see and begin trusting what your imagination can feel. The greatest mistake humanity has ever made is believing that the external world has authority over consciousness. People look at empty bank accounts and assume poverty. They look at loneliness and assume abandonment. They look at sickness and assume weakness. They look at failure and assume limitation. Yet all these conditions are only mirrors reflecting former assumptions held within the mind. The visible world is not the cause. It is the effect. And once you understand this, you become free. Most people are imprisoned, not by reality itself, but by their agreement with it. They constantly repeat the evidence of their senses. I am struggling. Nothing is working. Life is unfair. I can't succeed. Every statement is an act of creation. Every assumption hardens into fact. The mind accepts what is repeated with feeling, and the world faithfully reshapes itself around that acceptance. You do not become what you want. You become what you assume yourself to be. This is why two people can stand in the same situation and experience entirely different destinies. One sees obstacles, the other sees opportunity. One feels defeated, the other feels chosen. One identifies with limitation, the other identifies with possibility. The outer conditions may appear identical, yet their inner assumptions differ, and therefore their futures diverge. The world responds not to your wishes, but to your state of consciousness. If you wish to rise beyond your present circumstances, you must learn the sacred art of ignoring present appearances. This does not mean denying the existence of facts in a foolish way. It means refusing to grant them creative power. Facts are temporary. Assumptions are creative. A farmer does not dig up a seed every morning to see whether it is growing. He trusts the unseen process beneath the soil. Likewise, when you plant a new assumption within consciousness, you must allow it to mature without constantly disturbing it through fear, doubt, and contradiction. Many people fail because they keep returning to the old story. They pray for abundance and then spend the day feeling poor. They imagine love and then continue assuming rejection. They desire success but internally identify as failures. The inner state and the outer desire remain divided. Your dominant assumption always wins. The universe does not respond to what you occasionally affirm. It responds to what you fundamentally believe yourself to be. Therefore, if you wish to change your world, you must persist in the feeling of the wish fulfilled long before evidence appears. You must walk as though the unseen reality is more real than the visible one. This is the discipline that transforms ordinary lives into extraordinary ones. Imagine a person trapped in years of disappointment. Every experience seems to confirm defeat. Bills pile up. Opportunities disappear. Relationships crumble. To the senses, the situation appears hopeless. But the moment that individual dares to assume a number, your identity prosperous, loved, successful, secure, the unseen rearrangement begins. At first, nothing may appear different externally. The old world may continue echoing the past for a while, but internally, something shifts. The individual no longer reacts emotionally to appearances. They stop asking circumstances for permission to believe in themselves. They stop waiting for evidence before embodying confidence. And slowly, reality begins to bend. Unexpected opportunities emerge. New ideas arrive. Doors open mysteriously. People appear seemingly out of nowhere. Coincidences multiply. What the world calls luck is often only the external unfolding of an inner assumption sustained faithfully over time. The imagination is not fantasy. It is the workshop of creation. Every skyscraper existed in imagination before it existed in steel. Every invention existed mentally before it became physical. Every transformation in human history began as an unseen idea held firmly despite visible contradiction. The tragedy is that most people use imagination against themselves. They rehearse disaster. They anticipate rejection. They relive humiliation. They fear future suffering so intensely that they unconsciously invite it into experience. What you emotionally dwell upon, you energize. Your mind is like fertile soil. It does not judge what is planted within it. Whether you sow fear or confidence, scarcity or abundance, despair or triumph, the mind accepts the seed and expresses it outwardly. This is why guarding your inner conversations is essential. The voice within you shapes the world around you. If internally you constantly criticize yourself, life will mirror criticism. If internally you assume worthiness, life will gradually reflect honor, opportunity, and affection. People spend years trying to change circumstances without changing consciousness. They rearrange surfaces while leaving the inner identity untouched. Yet nothing truly changes until self-concept changes. Your self-concept is your destiny. If deep within you believe you are unworthy, you will unconsciously reject blessings when they arrive. If you assume struggle is natural, peace will feel uncomfortable. If you identify as unlucky, success will seem accidental and temporary. The world cannot consistently give you what contradicts your self-image. Therefore, the true work is internal, not forcing the outer world, but transforming the inner state from which the outer world emerges. When storms appear in life, most people panic because they believe appearances are permanent. But every visible condition is fluid. Reality is far more malleable than society teaches us. Consciousness continuously shapes experience. Have you never noticed how quickly life can change? A single phone call can alter a career. One meeting can transform a future. One idea can produce wealth. One decision can redirect an entire destiny. The world is not fixed. It is alive, responsive, and deeply connected to human assumption. The problem is persistence in negative identity. People cling to painful histories as though suffering was sacred. They define themselves by past mistakes, betrayals, failures, and disappointments. Yet the past has no power except the power you continue giving it through remembrance and emotional attachment. You are not condemned to repeat yesterday unless you continue assuming yesterday is who you are. The moment you accept a new identity internally, the chains of the past begin dissolving. This is why faith is so powerful. Faith is not blind belief in something outside yourself. Faith is loyalty to an unseen reality before physical confirmation appears. Faith is the courage to assume greatness while standing in the middle of limitation. Faith is remaining inwardly unmoved while appearances still echo the old story. Most people abandon their assumptions too soon. They plant seeds and then uproot them through doubt. They declare abundance in the morning and despair by evening. They imagine success one moment and rehearse failure the next. A divided mind produces inconsistent results. To create deliberately, you must become mentally disciplined. You must refuse to emotionally participate in conditions you no longer desire. When the outer world contradicts your chosen assumption, remain faithful inwardly. Persist. The night appears darkest before dawn because reality often reorganizes itself invisibly before visible change emerges. Think of a sculptor staring at a block of stone. Others see only rock. The sculptor sees the finished masterpiece hidden within it. Likewise, you must learn to see beyond appearances. You must perceive your desired reality inwardly before the world can reflect it outwardly. If you constantly seek evidence before believing, you remain trapped in reaction rather than creation. Creation begins within. The world teaches people to live from the outside in. It says, once circumstances improve, then you may feel successful. Once someone loves you, then you may feel worthy. Once money arrives, then you may feel secure. But this approach enslaves the individual to external conditions. The truth operates in reverse. Feel successful first, and success follows. Feel worthy first, and love appears. Feel secure first, and abundance organizes around you. The inner state precedes the outer manifestation. This principle explains why some individuals rise from impossible conditions while others remain trapped despite opportunities. Consciousness determines experience more than circumstance does. Never underestimate the power of assumption sustained with feeling. A person who inwardly assumes victory will unconsciously move differently, speak differently, think differently, decide differently, and therefore experience different outcomes. Their assumption alters behavior naturally without force. You do not need to manipulate life obsessively. You need to transform the state from which you operate. The outer world is like an echo. Yelling at the echo changes nothing. Change the sound, and the echo changes automatically. Likewise, stop fighting shadows and begin transforming the inner light, casting them. Many people are addicted to visible proof. They constantly monitor reality for signs of movement. But obsession with evidence often reveals doubt. True assumption rests calmly in the unseen. It understands that imagination is reality unfolding invisibly before becoming visible. The unseen always precedes the seen. Even nature reveals this principle. Roots form before trees emerge. Pregnancy develops invisibly before birth occurs. Ideas gestate mentally before becoming inventions. The invisible dimension always comes first. Why then do people trust visible circumstances more than invisible consciousness? Because society conditions humanity to worship appearances. From childhood, people are taught to react instead of create. They are taught to fear limitation rather than transcend it inwardly. But once an individual awakens to the creative power of assumption, life changes permanently. No longer are they victims of circumstance. No longer do they beg the world for permission, scion to dream. They understand that consciousness itself is the source from which experience flows. Imagine waking every day already feeling inwardly fulfilled. Not pretending mechanically, but genuinely accepting internally that your desired reality is inevitable. Imagine refusing to emotionally collapse because of temporary appearances. Imagine walking through adversity while secretly knowing the outcome has already shifted within consciousness. Such a person becomes unstoppable, not because they control every external event instantly, but because they no longer surrender their identity to appearances. There is tremendous power in inner persistence. A river cuts through stone not because of force alone, but because of continuous flow. Likewise, sustained assumption gradually reshapes reality. Persistence impresses the subconscious mind, and the subconscious expresses itself through circumstances. Do not measure your progress solely by physical evidence. Measure it by inner transformation. Are you thinking differently? Reacting differently? Feeling differently? If the inner state changes, the outer world must eventually reflect it. Reality cannot permanently resist a susta, innate state of consciousness. Therefore, guard your mind carefully. Choose assumptions deliberately. Speak inwardly as the person you desire to become. See yourself already victorious. Feel yourself already abundant. Experience internally the emotions you once believed depended upon future conditions. The future is shaped by present assumption. If you continue identifying with limitation, tomorrow repeats yesterday. But if you dare to assume a new identity today, tomorrow begins reorganizing itself accordingly. Some may call this unrealistic. Yet every great achievement once appeared unrealistic before becoming visible fact. Every revolutionary idea was initially dismissed by those enslaved to appearances. Human progress has always belonged to those who could mentally transcend visible limitation. You must become one of those people. Ignore temporary setbacks. Ignore delays. Ignore appearances that contradict your chosen reality. They are only echoes of former assumptions passing away. Do not emotionally resurrect them through fear and attention. Remain faithful to the new story. The moment you truly accept internally that you are already the person you wish to become, the transformation begins. Not someday, not eventually, now. For consciousness does not wait for permission from the external world. The outer world is forever rearranging itself to mirror the inner world of man. And so I leave you with this truth. Stop bowing before appearances. Stop asking circumstances to define you. Stop allowing visible conditions to dictate invisible possibility. The world you experience tomorrow is being shaped by the assumptions you entertain today. Assume wisely. Assume boldly. Assume consistently. Ignore your reality if it contradicts your highest vision. Persist in the unseen until the seen transforms itself around your conviction. For the greatest power you possess is not physical strength, wealth, status, or influence. It is the ability to assume a thing inwardly and remain faithful to that assumption until reality itself has no choice but to conform. And when you begin to understand this deeply, you will notice something extraordinary. Life has always been responding to you, not occasionally, not selectively, constantly. Every fear carried long enough became an experience. Every belief repeated with emotion became a circumstance. Every identity, accepted inwardly, eventually clothed itself in physical form. The process has never stopped. Most people were simply creating unconsciously. The difference now is awareness. An unconscious creator reacts to life and unknowingly reproduces the same conditions repeatedly. A conscious creator chooses assumptions deliberately and therefore begins directing experience intentionally. This is the dividing line between living by default and living by design. Look carefully at your life and you will discover patterns. The person who assumes abandonment finds evidence of rejection everywhere. The person who assumes respect naturally receives different treatment. The person who assumes success walks into opportunities others cannot even perceive. Reality filters itself through assumption. This is why changing the outer world without changing the inner self becomes exhausting. People try endlessly to force outcomes while secretly remaining identified with limitation. They chase love while feeling unlovable. They pursue wealth while inwardly fearing prosperity. They seek peace while mentally addicted to conflict. The subconscious mind does not respond to occasional words. It responds to dominant feeling. Feeling is the secret force behind manifestation because feeling implies acceptance. When you feel something deeply, you are psychologically declaring it true. The subconscious accepts that emotional conviction and projects it outwardly into experience. That is why emotional discipline matters so greatly. If you spend your days emotionally absorbed in fear, resentment, jealousy, or defeat, you are unknowingly sustaining those states. But if you deliberately cultivate gratitude, confidence, certainty, and fulfillment before physical evidence appears, you begin shifting the entire structure of your reality. The outer world cannot help but mirror your inner atmosphere. This is why some individuals seem magnetic. They carry an assumption about themselves that influences every interaction. Without speaking a word, they radiate expectation. They assume value, and therefore the world reflects value back to them. They assume opportunity, and doors appear. They assume favor, and circumstances align. Meanwhile, another person may possess talent, intelligence, and potential, yet remain trapped because internally they continue identifying with failure. Their assumptions lently sabotage possibilities before they fully unfold. Your inner identity always speaks louder than your outer effort. Understand this clearly. Effort alone does not create reality. State of consciousness does. Two people may perform the same action, yet produce entirely different outcomes because their assumptions differ. One acts from fear, the other from certainty. One acts from desperation, the other from fulfillment. Though behavior may appear similar externally, consciousness behind the action changes the result completely. This is why forcing life rarely works for long. Compulsion reveals disbelief. Desperation reveals doubt. Anxiety reveals attachment to appearances. The one who truly assumes already possessing the desired reality moves differently. There is calmness. There is stability. There is quiet confidence. They no longer chase frantically because inwardly they already feel complete. And paradoxically, that inner completeness attracts what others struggle to obtain. The world mirrors states, not desperation. Consider how often people postpone living. They say, once I become successful, then I'll feel worthy. Once I find love, then I'll feel complete. Circumstances improve, then I'll relax. But consciousness does not work this way. The feeling must come first. You must become inwardly what you desire outwardly. This requires courage because the senses will argue constantly. The visible world will attempt to persuade you that nothing has changed. It will present old evidence, old delays, old disappointments. And in those moments, you face the true test. Will you remain loyal to appearances or loyal to your chosen assumption? Most people return to old thinking because appearances feel convincing. They mistake temporary facts for permanent truth. Yet facts are only snapshots of previous states of consciousness. They are echoes from the past, not final declarations about the future. A person who understands this refuses to panic over temporary conditions. If the outer world shows lack, they do not identify as poor. If it shows delay, they do not assume failure. If it shows opposition, they do not abandon their vision. They understand that visible reality is still catching up to inner transformation. This patience is not passive, it is powerful. Patience rooted in assumption is the refusal to betray the unseen because of temporary appearances. It is inner stability in the face of contradiction. It is maintaining the end internally even while the bridge of events unfolds invisibly. And life always builds bridges. People often wonder how their desires will manifest. They obsess over methods, timing, and mechanisms. But the conscious creator focuses less on how and more on being. The moment you fully assume the identity of the fulfilled self, reality begins organizing pathways automatically. Ideas emerge naturally. Encounters happen unexpectedly. Circumstances rearrange themselves. Events that once seemed impossible begin unfolding with astonishing precision. What appears miraculous from the outside often began as a sustained inner assumption invisible to everyone else. Never underestimate the creative power of sustained imagination. Nations have been transformed by ideas held firmly in consciousness. Entire careers have emerged from one invisible conviction. Relationships, inventions, fortunes, and masterpieces all originated within the unseen realm before becoming physical reality. Imagination is not escape from reality. It is the womb of reality. Those who mock imagination rarely understand, and its power because they judge only by appearances. Yet every visible achievement was once invisible. Every physical condition existed mentally before becoming material. Even your current life was imagined unconsciously long before you experienced it physically. The fearful person imagined loss repeatedly. The anxious person rehearsed disaster internally. The insecure person assumed rejection before evidence appeared. The mind created patterns that later hardened into experience. But the same law that created limitation can create liberation. You are never permanently trapped because consciousness itself remains fluid. The moment you change assumptions persistently, your future begins changing as well. No past failure can imprison a person who no longer identifies with it internally. Identity is destiny. If you continue calling yourself broken, life reflects fragmentation. If you continue identifying as unlucky, circumstances echo misfortune. But if you begin assuming yourself blessed, chosen, capable, and worthy, the subconscious gradually accepts the new concept and projects it outwardly. The transformation may feel unnatural at first because old assumptions resist replacement. Cement. The mind tends to return to familiar identities even when they produce suffering. This is why persistence matters more than intensity. A small assumption repeated consistently becomes stronger than a powerful emotion experienced briefly. So continue returning mentally to the fulfilled state. Continue seeing yourself as already transformed. Continue speaking inwardly from the identity you choose, rather than the circumstances you currently observe. Eventually, the new state feels natural. And once an assumption feels natural, manifestation accelerates because resistance dissolves. The subconscious no longer treats the desire as distant or impossible. It accepts it as reality. Naturalness is the key. The goal is not forced pretending. It is inner acceptance. It is reaching the point where abundance feels normal, success feels expected, love feels deserved, and peace feels familiar. When the desired state becomes psychologically natural, the outer world begins reflecting it with increasing consistency. This is why repetition is powerful. Not mechanical repetition without feeling, but repeated occupancy of the desired state. Every time you imagine lovingly, confidently, and deliberately, you strengthen the new identity. Eventually, the old identity weakens from lack of attention. What you starve mentally begins fading from experience. Many people unknowingly nourish the very conditions they wish to escape. They repeatedly discuss problems, analyze fears, relive disappointments, and emotionally rehearse limitation. Attention is creative energy. Whatever consistently receives your emotional attention gains strength within consciousness. Therefore, choose carefully where your focus rests. If you wish to transcend your current reality, stop emotionally feeding what you no longer desire. Withdraw identification from fear. Withdraw attention from defeat. Withdraw belief from limitation. And instead, nourish the vision of the person you choose to become. Not someday, now, because consciousness only operates in the present moment. Creation is always happening now. The future is not created tomorrow. It is created by present assumptions entertained repeatedly today. Every moment becomes an opportunity to select identity consciously. Will you define yourself by appearances or by imagination? Will you accept temporary facts as permanent truths? Will you surrender your inner authority to external conditions? Or will you finally recognize that the creative power shaping your world has always been operating through your own consciousness? The individual who truly grasps this no longer fears life the same way. They stop feeling helpless before circumstances because they understand circumstances themselves are movable. Reality becomes less rigid, less terrifying, less final. There emerges a quiet inner knowing. No matter what appears externally, assumptions can change the trajectory of experience. And this understanding produces freedom unlike anything the world can offer. Freedom from fear of circumstances. Freedom from dependence upon external validation. Freedom from the exhausting need to control every detail physically. Because once you understand that consciousness precedes reality, you stop living as a prisoner of appearances and begin living as the architect of experience. This does not mean challenges vanish instantly. It means challenges lose their authority over your identity. You no longer look at temporary obstacles and conclude that defeat is inevitable. You no longer interpret delays as permanent failure. You understand that movement is occurring beneath the surface even when visible evidence remains unchanged. The seed beneath the soil appears invisible long before it breaks through the earth. Likewise, assumptions germinate in silence before they emerge as visible facts. Most people abandon their dreams during this invisible stage because they mistake silence for inactivity. They assume that because nothing appears externally, nothing is happening internally. Yet some of the most profound transformations occur long before physical manifestation becomes visible. A person may still appear poor outwardly while inwardly becoming wealthy in consciousness. Another may still appear lonely while internally cultivating the certainty of love. Another may still stand in uncertainty while inwardly stabilizing into confidence and purpose. And eventually, the outer world catches up. It must. For the visible world has no independent life of its own. It reflects consciousness the way a mirror reflects an image. The mirror cannot choose what to display independently. It only reproduces what stands before it. Life behaves the same way. Change the inner image, and the outer reflection gradually changes as well. But this requires persistence because the old world does not disappear overnight. Former assumptions continue echoing temporarily through circumstances. Many people become discouraged during this period and unknowingly reactivate the old state through fear and emotional reaction. This is why mental discipline matters more than momentary inspiration. Anyone can feel powerful briefly. Anyone can imagine greatness for a few minutes. But can you remain faithful internally when appearances contradict your assumption? Can you persist when results seem delayed? Can you refuse to emotionally surrender to visible evidence? That is where transformation truly occurs. The individual who masters inner persistence eventually develops extraordinary stability. They cease reacting emotionally to every passing condition because they know conditions are temporary projections rather than permanent truths. Imagine the power of walking through uncertainty while inwardly convinced of your inevitable success. Imagine maintaining peace while others panic because your faith rests in consciousness rather than appearances. Imagine remaining inwardly fulfilled even before physical evidence arrives. Such a person moves differently through life. They are no longer desperate for immediate validation because they understand that manifestation follows assumption naturally. They stop chasing frantically because inwardly they already occupy the state others seek externally. And strangely enough, life begins gravitating toward them effortlessly. The world responds differently to those who assume fulfillment rather than lack. People sense confidence subconsciously. Opportunities align with expectations subconsciously. Relationships mirror self-concept subconsciously. Entire patterns of experience reorganize themselves around sustained assumptions. This is why changing self-concept changes everything. If you see yourself as insignificant, life reflects insignificance. If you see yourself as burdened, life reflects struggle. If you see yourself as unwanted, relationships mirror rejection. But the moment your self-concept changes internally, the structure of your experiences begins shifting accordingly. Not because the world suddenly becomes different, but because your consciousness begins selecting different realities. Most individuals underestimate how deeply identity influences perception. Two people can receive the same opportunity and experience it differently because their assumptions differ. One assumes success and sees possibility. The other assumes failure and sees risk. Reality filters itself through belief, and because of this, your assumptions determine not only what comes into your life, but also what you are capable of recognizing within it. There are opportunities surrounding people constantly that they cannot perceive because their self-concept rejects them subconsciously. Wealth passes by unnoticed because poverty feels familiar. Love goes unrecognized because rejection feels natural. Possibility remains invisible because limitation dominates consciousness. The world reveals itself according to the state from which you observe it. That is why inner transformation precedes outer expansion. You cannot consistently experience a reality that feels psychologically impossible to you. The subconscious always moves toward what feels natural and resists what feels foreign. Therefore, your task is not merely to desire a better life, but to normalize it internally. Become comfortable with greatness. Become familiar with abundance. Become emotionally acquainted with success, peace, love, and fulfillment. Do not treat your desires as distant miracles reserved for extraordinary people. Treat them as natural extensions of your chosen identity. The moment something feels natural internally, resistance weakens dramatically. This explains why some manifestations happen quickly, while others seem delayed. The subconscious does not struggle with what feels believable and emotionally accepted. But when a desire clashes violently with self-concept, inner conflict emerges. A person may consciously desire wealth while subconsciously identifying with struggle. They may desire love while secretly assuming abandonment. They may want recognition while inwardly fearing visibility. And these contradictory states slow manifestation because consciousness remains divided. Therefore, honesty with oneself becomes essential. You must become aware of the assumptions operating beneath surface thoughts. Not merely what you say occasionally, but what you consistently feel true emotionally. Your dominant emotional identity shapes your reality more than passing affirmations ever could. This is why repetition without feeling often produces little change. Words alone are not enough. The subconscious responds most powerfully to emotionally accepted assumptions. It is feeling combined with persistence that impresses consciousness deeply. Feel yourself already becoming the person you desire to be, not through strain or force, but through quiet occupancy of the state. Walk mentally as though your desired reality were already unfolding. Speak inwardly from fulfillment rather than longing. Think from the end instead of thinking of the end. There is a profound difference between wanting something and identifying with having it. The one who merely wants remains psychologically separated from the desire. The one who assumes possession begins embodying it internally now. And embodiment changes everything, because once consciousness shifts, behavior shifts naturally. Decisions shift naturally. Reactions shift naturally. You stop operating from fear and begin operating from expectation. A person who assumes prosperity begins making different choices unconsciously. A person who assumes confidence carries themselves differently without effort. A person who assumes love stops interpreting every silence as rejection. Inner assumptions alter external behavior automatically. This is why conscious manifestation is less about controlling the outer world and more about mastering the inner state from which actions emerge. The outer world follows identity, and identity itself is shaped through repeated assumption. You are always assuming something, even now. The question is whether those assumptions are deliberate or unconscious. Some assume life is difficult. Some assume happiness never lasts. Some assume people cannot be trusted. Some assume success belongs to others. And life faithfully mirrors those assumptions again and again until the individual awakens to their creative role. Awareness changes everything because once you recognize the law operating within consciousness, you can begin choosing assumptions intentionally instead of inheriting them unconsciously from past experiences, society, fear, or conditioning. This is the beginning of true transformation, no longer reacting automatically, no longer allowing appearances to dictate emotional states, no longer surrendering imagination to visible limitation. Instead, you begin selecting inner states deliberately. You choose what to identify with. You choose what to emotionally nourish. You choose which story receives your belief and attention. And gradually the old reality loosens its grip. At first the change may feel subtle. Small shifts in mood, new perspectives, unexpected moments of confidence, a growing sense that possibilities exist beyond visible conditions. Then synchronistic events begin appearing, conversations change, opportunities emerge, old patterns weaken, new pathways open. Life starts responding differently because you are relating to it differently internally. The individual who once felt powerless begins sensing creative authority again. not arrogance, not delusion, but recognition of a deeper law governing experience, a law more powerful than appearances, a law more enduring than temporary conditions, a law silently shaping human lives whether acknowledged consciously or not. And once you truly understand this principle, you can never again fully return to the old way of thinking. Because you begin seeing evidence everywhere that consciousness influences reality. You notice how expectations affect outcomes. You observe how self-concept alters relationships. You recognize how W assumptions quietly shape perception, behavior, opportunity, and experience. Life itself becomes a mirror revealing inner states. And instead of fearing the mirror, you learn to transform the image standing before it internally first. You stop begging the world to change while remaining inwardly unchanged yourself. You stop demanding different results from the same assumptions. You stop identifying with old pain simply because it once felt familiar. And perhaps most importantly, you stop worshipping appearances as final truth. For appearances are always shifting. Conditions are always temporary. Circumstances are forever rearranging themselves according to the movements of consciousness. What seems impossible today may become ordinary tomorrow once assumptions change deeply enough. That is why you must protect your imagination fiercely. The world will constantly attempt to drag your attention back toward fear, limitation, and visible evidence. It will encourage you to doubt yourself whenever external conditions appear unfavorable. It will tempt you to abandon your assumption prematurely. But the disciplined mind remains faithful inwardly, not because it ignores really, foolishly, but because it understands where reality originates, from consciousness first, always consciousness first. And when this truth settles fully into your being, something remarkable begins happening within you. External conditions lose their ability to define your emotional state completely. You begin carrying fulfillment within yourself rather than waiting for circumstances to provide it. You stop depending entirely upon visible outcomes for inner peace, because you recognize that the unseen world of assumption is already generating future experience invisibly. This inner independence changes the entire quality of existence. Instead of waking each morning, asking the world what kind of person you are, you begin deciding internally who you will be regardless of temporary appearances. You stop negotiating your identity with circumstances. You stop allowing passing conditions to determine permanent self-concepts. And this alone separates creators from reactors. Reactors wait for the outer world to give them permission to feel confident, secure, loved, or successful. Creators generate those states internally first and allow the world to catch up afterward. One lives at the mercy of appearances. The other understands appearances are delayed reflections. Most people spend their entire lives chasing effects while ignoring causes. They attempt to fix outcomes without changing consciousness. They desire different experiences while remaining psychologically identical to the version of themselves that created the current reality. But reality does not transform permanently until identity transforms. The outer world can only consistently reflect who you believe yourself to be. That is why temporary success often disappears for individuals whose self-concept remains rooted in lack. Wealth enters their lives briefly, but internally they still feel poor. Love appears, but internally they still feel unworthy. Opportunities arrive, but internally they still expect loss. Eventually, the subconscious pulls experience back toward the familiar identity. The subconscious always seeks psychological consistency. This is why inner work matters more than surface achievement. A changed world without a changed self rarely lasts. But a changed self inevitably produces a changed world over time. If you truly wish to transform your life, stop focusing only on acquiring things externally and begin focusing on becoming someone internally. Become the version of yourself for whom your desires feel natural, not forced, not distant, not impossible, natural. Naturalness dissolves resistance because the subconscious accepts what feels normal without struggle. The person who naturally expects success does not panic at temporary setbacks. The person who naturally expects love does not obsess over every silence. The person who naturally expects abundance does not emotionally collapse over temporary financial pressure. Their inner identity stabilizes them. And stability is power. The world often appears chaotic because most individuals live emotionally dependent upon external conditions. Their moods rise and fall according to appearances. A compliment lifts them. A rejection destroys them. A delay discourages them. An obstacle convinces them they are failing. But the conscious creator learns emotional sovereignty. They understand that reacting emotionally to every appearance only strengthens unwanted states. Attention energizes reality. Emotional participation nourishes conditions. Therefore, they become selective about what receives belief and identification. This does not mean suppressing human emotion. It means refusing to let temporary appearances define permanent truth. A storm passing through the sky does not become the identity of the sky itself. Likewise, temporary circumstances do not define your essential creative power unless you continue identifying with them repeatedly. You must learn to separate current appearances from ultimate reality. Current appearances are merely the visible results of previous assumptions. Ultimate reality exists in consciousness itself, the realm where new assumptions can be planted deliberately and sustained until they externalize physically. And this understanding changes how you move through adversity. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin asking, "What state of consciousness have I been occupying?" Instead of feeling helpless before circumstances, you recognize your capacity to alter assumptions and therefore alter future experience. Responsibility replaces victimhood, not blame. Responsibility. There is enormous difference between blaming yourself and recognizing your creative authority. Blame weakens. Responsibility empowers. Blame traps people in guilt over the past. Responsibility reminds them they can choose differently now. And now is always where power exists. The past survives only through continued identification. Every time you emotionally relive failure, resentment, fear, or humiliation, you reactivate old states within consciousness. But when you withdraw identification from those memories and occupy a new state deliberately, the past gradually loses creative influence over the future. You are not obligated to remain loyal to former versions of yourself. You may reinvent identity internally at any moment. This is one of the greatest truths human beings rarely understand. Personality is not fixed. Destiny is not fixed. Self-concept is not fixed. All are shaped through repeated assumptions accepted over time. If a person spends years assuming weakness, weakness becomes natural. If they spend years assuming rejection, rejection becomes expected. But if they begin persistently assuming confidence, capability, and worthiness, those states too become natural eventually. Whatever consciousness accepts repeatedly becomes identity, and identity expresses itself automatically through life. This is why imagination must be protected carefully. Every mental image entertained with feeling influences consciousness. Every inner conversation contributes to self-concept. Every assumption plants seeds. Most individuals are extremely careless with imagination. They permit fear to rehearse disaster endlessly. They mentally argue for limitations. They visualize worst-case scenarios repeatedly. Then they wonder why anxiety dominates their lives. Imagination is not harmless daydreaming. It is a creative activity. The images held emotionally within consciousness become blueprints for future experience. Therefore, discipline your inner world the way a gardener disciplines a garden. Do not nourish weeds and expect flowers. Do not feed fear and expect peace. Do not cultivate self-hatred and expect fulfilling relationships. Consciousness reproduces whatever consistently occupies it. The fortunate truth, however, is that no condition needs to remain permanent. Because consciousness remains fluid, reality remains transformable. Even deeply rooted assumptions can change through persistence and deliberate occupancy of new states. At first, new assumptions may feel unnatural because the mind has rehearsed old identities for years, but repetition gradually weakens old patterns. The subconscious learns through familiarity. This is why persistence outranks intensity. A quiet assumption maintained consistently reshapes consciousness more effectively than occasional bursts of emotional excitement. Transformation happens through repeated occupancy of the desired state until it becomes psychologically normal. Return again and again to the feeling of fulfillment. Even when appearances disagree, especially when appearances disagree, for that is precisely when creative faith matters most. Anyone can believe after evidence appears. The true creator believes before confirmation arrives. They remain inwardly loyal to the unseen reality because they understand that physical manifestation is always delayed. The outer world moves slower than imagination. This delay confuses many people. They assume that because results have not appeared instantly, nothing is happening. Yet unseen processes often require time to reorganize circumstances completely. Bridges of events form invisibly long before their purpose becomes clear. One conversation leads unexpectedly to another. One idea opens pathways, previously hidden. One seeming setback redirects a person toward greater alignment. Life rearranges itself through countless interconnected movements, impossible to predict fully from the surface level. This is why obsession with controlling every detail often creates resistance. The conscious creator focuses primarily on maintaining the desired state internally while allowing life to organize the external pathway naturally. There is wisdom greater than conscious planning operating within reality. When assumptions change deeply enough, behavior, perception, opportunity, and circumstance begin aligning almost automatically. People frequently describe such experiences as coincidences, luck, or miracles, because they cannot see the invisible assumptions preceding visible outcomes. But nothing appears from nowhere. The unseen always precedes the seen. And once you recognize this pattern, you begin understanding why imagination is far more powerful than society admits. Entire civilizations were shaped first through invisible ideas held within human consciousness. Every invention, movement, artistic masterpiece, and transformation originated internally before becoming physical. Visible world is humanity's collective imagination made tangible. Yet most individuals continue underestimating their own creative influence because they have been conditioned to worship external conditions instead of consciousness itself. They believe reality happens to them rather than through them. And so they remain trapped reacting to appearances instead of generating new assumptions deliberately. But the moment an individual truly grasps their creative role, life changes permanently. Fear begins weakening because circumstances lose their appearance of absolute authority. Hope becomes rational because transformation becomes understandable. Possibility expands because limitation no longer appears fixed. The person awakens to a profound realization. Reality is far more flexible than it seems. And with that realization comes a different way of living, a calmer way, a more deliberate way, a more imaginative way. Instead of compulsively rehearsing fear, the conscious creator rehearses fulfillment. Instead of mentally repeating old disappointments, they inwardly occupy desired outcomes. Instead of identifying with temporary struggle, they identify with transformation already. Underway. This inner shift gradually changes emotional atmosphere. And emotional atmosphere influences everything. And so, before I leave you tonight, remember this above all else. The world you see is not fixed, final, or absolute. It is only the shadow of what you have repeatedly accepted within yourself. Every limitation that appears permanent today can dissolve tomorrow the moment you refuse to identify with it any longer. Every dream that feels distant can become reality the moment you dare to assume it already belongs to you inwardly. Do not wait for the world to change before you believe in yourself. Do not wait for evidence before you embody confidence, peace, abundance, or love. The people who transform their lives are not the ones who blindly obey appearances, they are the ones who persist in imagination despite appearances. When reality says impossible, dare to assume possible. When circumstances say wait, dare to assume now. When the world says you cannot, dare to assume I already am. Because the greatest power you will ever possess is not outside you. It is the power to choose your inner state regardless of what surrounds you. The power to remain faithful to an unseen vision until the visible world bends itself around your assumption. The power to rise beyond fear, beyond past conditioning, beyond temporary conditions, and declare inwardly, I refuse to let appearances define my destiny. So walk out into life differently after today. Think differently, feel differently, assume differently. And when the world tries once again to convince you that your circumstances are permanent, smile quietly and remember, reality is only the mirror and you are the one standing before it.